friends, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about 8 plants that I believe you should be avoiding as a beginner plant parent. Plants that you can probably find in most plant shops, but I do not think that you should get if you are new to this whole plant hobby. Before we get into it, I want to say if you're new here and you don't know me already, hi, my name is Emma and I make houseplanty content all over the internet, so if you want to follow along with my houseplanty journey and maybe learn something along the way, stick around, watch more of my videos, and subscribe to my channel. If you are not new, welcome back. I really appreciate it. Also, before we get into this, I want to give a tiny bit of a disclaimer. I want to say that this is just my opinion based off of my experience as a houseplant parent, what I have seen in my plant journey, growing some of these plants and trying them out for myself, and what I don't think is necessarily beginner friendly. So if you have had success with these as a beginner plant parent, good for you. That's great. Also, don't let me stop you. If you really want to try one of these plants, go for it. That is your own choice and you can do whatever you want. So this is just my opinions. Let's get into it. Just gonna shift over here so I can put up some pictures and show y'all what I'm talking about. But first off, we have Alocasias. And while I absolutely love myself an Alocasia, they're one of my favorite genuses. It definitely takes a little while to start understanding how Alocasia work, especially in different homes. They also really do not like change. So it is pretty common if you get an Alocasia from a plant shop and you bring it home that it will drop at least a few of the older leaves, if not all of them. They don't like big shifts in their life. Also, it's very likely that if you're bringing an Alocasia home from a plant shop, it's used to being in this humid, more ideal environment because the shop owner has to make sure all these plants stay really nice. But in your home, it'll probably be more difficult to provide the humidity that you know it wants, unless you're putting it in somewhere like a kitchen or a bathroom, which you totally could. I just don't think that they are a good beginner houseplant. Also, if they're not getting enough of what they need light-wise, they can go dormant over the winter and die back completely, and sometimes that can be mistaken for death. So it is a little bit more of a complicated one than sort of your average pothos. It wouldn't necessarily be my first choice as a beginner plant parent. That being said, one of the first few plants I had in my collection was my Alocasia poly. I think if you are to get any sort of Alocasia, that would be the best one to start with first. One, because they're a little bit more common, and so if it does die, you can replace it easier and you're not wasting loads of money on it. But also it is fairly hardy compared to other Alocasias. That is one that I have just out in my home, not getting all that much light or attention from me, and it's still doing really well. Whereas if I put some of my other Alocasias into that situation, I know that they would not be happy and would probably very much dislike me for it. So if you have to get an Alocasia, that is the one that I think is the best bet, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend them to a beginner. Next up are ferns. Kind of for similar reasons. These plants also really like a good bit of humidity, but they're also a lot more picky when it comes to their watering schedule. Especially, I have heard things like they like to have a dry top but a wet feet at the bottom, so like bottom watering is the best for them. But also all of the ferns that I have had in my collection, I just breathe near them and then they start dropping leaves. They get brown and crispy so quickly that I don't think that they're very beginner friendly, and it's a shame because they're absolutely gorgeous. I feel like you see them in sort of homes looking really good and you're like, oh, I can do that. But I find it really difficult to get one to get to that point. I think also a common misconception with ferns is that they are a low light plant, and so you can put them in a sort of dark corner and that space is perfect for them because they've got humidity there. But that is not the case. I found in my experience that they do like quite a bit of light. Obviously not harsh direct sunlight because that's going to burn their leaves, but like not no light. You can't put them in no light. They do still need in my experience, bright indirect light in order to keep growing. But even then, if your watering isn't just like up to their high standards, they can still freak out and have an absolute fit. So I don't have any ferns anymore in my home just because I find them too difficult and too high maintenance. And if I were just getting into this houseplant hobby, I wouldn't want to add something so high maintenance to my collection. I see peperomias in so many plant shops. I even see them in grocery stores, and you can kind of pick them up from anywhere. But I think that they are so much more difficult than they seem. All of the peperomias that I had at the beginning of my houseplanting collection, I got from plant shops because I thought they looked really cool, they were beautiful, but I very quickly killed all of them. I found it was really difficult to find their balance with water because they are semi-succulent-y. It actually took me several years to even try again after those initial ones, and from there a year of trying quite hard to get them to grow well for me. And even now, most of them aren't growing perfectly in my collection, and I'm still working on the water with them, but I find it's so easy to get these ones and have all of the leaves just kind of melt off. They go really floppy really easily, and again, if their water isn't exactly right, they throw an absolute fit and can very easily stem rot, but also can very easily dry out too much. They need a very specific balance, and I think that is very hard to achieve, especially as a new plant parent. And because oftentimes these are sold as small plants, they require even more delicate balance because they don't hold on to water for very long. So you need to be watering them even more than you think you do, but at the same time, not. It's just not something that I would suggest you get into. And honestly, I found that growing them from stem propagation worked a lot better for me than getting one as an actual plant. And that isn't typical for me. Typically, I'd rather have a plant physically with roots on it and learn from that before I go into propagations. But with peperomia, it has been the exact opposite. And I've really felt like I've learned from the propagation process what they like and how to care for them. So if you want to give them a go, I recommend seeing if you can get a stem or a leaf cutting from a friend and try and go from there. You don't have to do that. I just think it's the best way that I learned how to take care of them myself. Next up, we've got carnivorous plants, and it's an absolute shame because carnivorous plants are so freaking cool, and they can be used to help with pests like fungus gnats and stuff in your collection, but they are so high maintenance. Most of them like being in absolutely full sun, but also sitting in a puddle of water, and not just any water. It can't just be tap water. It needs to be like rainwater in order for them to be happy. And so I just find them a little bit too complicated to suggest to a beginner, maybe a bit more intermediate. But even still, I personally haven't gone delving into carnivorous plants because I don't have an environment that I think could even really work for them at all. So you really need to have that specific sort of location in order for them to work, or live somewhere like really humid and warm, like swampy but sunny. Somewhere like that might be really good. But in the UK, we don't really have the sort of environment that will promote really great growth for carnivorous plants in most cases. Another absolute sun lover is the Fiddle Leaf Fig. And I feel like you see these very regularly in sort of interior design, magazines, websites, etc. And they look really great as a big, beautiful statement plant. And so it's one that you definitely want to get because it'll grow big in your home. That is not the experience of most plant parents at all. One, they really like a lot of sunlight. I've personally not had one because I haven't lived in a place, again, where I could provide it with the sort of sunlight that it requires. But also, they detest change. They dislike coming into a new home. They will probably drop leaves. They dislike even being moved across a room. They don't like that, and they will drop leaves. They will tell you that they are not enjoying it. So it's very likely that if you're getting a Fiddle Leaf Fig, it's not going to stay as big and beautiful as when you bought it. It will end up looking like a stick with maybe 1 or 2 leaves at the top. Less ideal. I mean, if that's the look you're going for, go for it. But I would basically just say don't go there unless you know you have the perfect spot for it already. The next one is Anthuriums. I know they are absolutely freaking gorgeous and we all want them in our homes. They're super popular on Instagram and stuff right now, but I don't necessarily think that they are a beginner-friendly houseplant. A lot of them are very, very picky and they like quite high humidity. It can cause quite a lot of issues for them if you aren't giving them enough humidity and water. I found semi-hydro helps with that a little bit, but for the most part, you need to be keeping them in a bit more of a special environment, especially the ones that are going a little bit more expensive. You probably can't get most Anthuriums for less than 20 pounds, and if you're spending that much on a plant, you want to make sure that you can take care of it before you buy it. I don't know, I just don't want anyone to be wasting their money on something that they can't necessarily take care of. Obviously, you can do that at your own risk, but if I were you, I wouldn't. If you absolutely need to get yourself an Anthurium though, I would suggest starting with a Calatheas. They're probably the most common, least expensive Anthurium, and I feel like they're a good way to get into the Anthurium vibe while not wasting too much money up front. Like, you can kind of learn from them how to take care of more expensive Anthuriums, and if you can keep that Calatheas alive, you can move on to things like Magnificum and Workmanum and Regals and all of that. But that being said, they are still complicated, and I wouldn't necessarily suggest a Calatheas for a beginner plant parent, but if you absolutely have to, that's where you should go. Another one that requires high humidity, I mean, a lot of the ones on this list have required higher humidity, and that's part of why I suggest you wouldn't get them as a beginner. But the next one is Calathea. These are all over plant shops. They are everywhere in plant shops, and they are absolutely gorgeous plants. And again, a Calathea was one of my very early on plants in my collection, but they do require quite a lot of maintenance in order to keep them looking really, really good. I've had Calatheas before where I got them, brought them home, and then slowly they just started getting crispier and crispier and not having a good time. It's just really easy to get them to a place where they're just not looking good anymore, and then it kind of defeats the point of having the plant. Also, they are massive spider mite magnets. Spider mites love them so, so much, and they are such a pain to get rid of spider mites on because there's just so many leaves, so many nooks and crannies for them to get into. So it's kind of like inviting pests into your home. And as a beginner plant parent, I would not suggest you do that. You don't want to be bringing pests in if you at all can. Check the plants before you buy them, but there's still magnets for them. I don't quite understand how, but they just end up getting spider mites. And also, they're super picky with humidity and watering. If you're not giving them enough of either of those things, they can go brown and crispy very, very quickly. So they're just not the easiest one to start off with. And then lastly, we have the string of pearls. This is one that I see commonly actually recommended to beginner plant parents because it is more succulent-y and can usually tolerate a little bit more underwatering, but they are still extremely finicky. Every single string of pearls plant that I've ever had has died, and I am a chronic underwaterer. And I don't know if I've just let it get too far or what, but I've never really been able to get them to be happy in my home, no matter whether I water them a lot or a little bit. They don't like it either way, in my experience. Also, you need to put them in the absolute ideal spot. Most of them will be coming in a hanging basket, and while that is great, you want to be making sure that the top of the plant is still seeing the sun, because if you don't, the top can go quite bald and you'll end up having a plant with no pearls on top and just a load of pearls on the bottom, which again is fine if that's the look you're going for, if you don't care, but the top of the plant needs to see the sunlight, and the bottom of the plant, and the side of the plant. You basically need to put it in a direct sun-facing window in order for it to be happy in your home. And even then, you have to get the watering right as well. So I find them just a little bit too complicated to recommend to a beginner. So that is it. Those are the houseplants that I think you should avoid if you are a beginner plant parent, just for your own sanity. Not to say you can't do them. You can do whatever you want. You are your own autonomous human being, but it's just what I recommend. If you like this video, can you please give it a thumbs up down below and leave a comment on other houseplanty things you'd like me to talk about in the future. And don't forget to subscribe for more. Thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!